The US is seeking evidence that the Chinese military is preparing for a potential North Korea contingency, a US defense official told CNN Thursday. Chinese Air Force land attack cruise missile-capable bombers were put on high alert on Wednesday, the official said, adding that the US has also seen an extraordinary number of Chinese military aircraft being brought up to full readiness through intensified maintenance. There has also been rhetoric from the US and Pyongyang, with the latter state media warning Thursday that a preemptive strike by North Korea would result in the US and South Korea being completely destroyed in an instant.
This spring, Canada's Iceberg Alley is living up to its name. Tourists are flocking to the town of Fairyland to see the behemoth that has grounded just offshore. The iceberg towers over the picturesque town on the east coast of Newfoundland and Labrador. The Canadian Ice Service classified it as large. This means it has a height of 151 to 240 feet and is between 401 and 670 feet long. Iceberg season runs from spring through late summer. The waters start to refreeze in mid-September. A combination of currents bring Arctic ice southward along the Newfoundland coast. This is how it earned the Iceberg Alley nickname. CNN meteorologist Brandon Miller said an iceberg this large so close to the shore is rare.
Federal prosecutors said on Wednesday an Ohio man who professed support for the Islamic State militant group has pleaded guilty to soliciting the murder of U.S. military personnel. The U.S. Department of Justice said in a statement 24-year-old Terrence McNeil of Akron, Ohio, pleaded guilty to 5 counts of solicitation to commit a crime of violence. He pled guilty to 5 counts of making threatening interstate communications. Under the terms of his plea, McNeil faces between 15 and 20 years in prison when he is sentenced on August 2nd. McNeil's attorney, Nathan Ray, could not immediately be reached for comment. A spokesman for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Cleveland said the plea was entered on Tuesday in federal court. The United States on Tuesday held what it dubbed a historic UN Security Council meeting on the link between rights abuses and conflict. However, it dropped a push for the broad issue to become a council fixture after at least 6 members opposed it. Diplomats said Russia, China, Egypt, Ethiopia, Kazakhstan, and Bolivia were against the move. The U.S., which is the council president for April, did not risk the measure being put to a rare procedural vote, as Senegal's support was uncertain. The opposing council members say rights discussion should be confined to the Geneva-based Human Rights Council, which has been accused of being anti-Israel.
Despite China's support of the measure, CBS News reports Russia objected to a Security Council statement proposed by the U.S. on Wednesday that would have condemned North Korea's missile tests. A Security Council diplomat familiar with the negotiations confirmed that the draft press statement was approved by China. The country is the North's closest ally. In addition, the other permanent members of the Security Council approved the statement. Russia was the lone dissenter. The statement includes a Security Council demand that the Democratic People's Republic of Korea conduct no further tests. It states that North Korea's illegal ballistic missile activities are contributing to its development of nuclear weapons.
General Motors has ceased doing business in Venezuela after authorities seized its only factory in the country. GM has called this an illegal judicial seizure of its assets. While anti-government protesters fought with authorities, the plant was confiscated Wednesday. Venezuela is currently experiencing economic difficulties such as food shortages and triple-digit inflation. In a statement Thursday, GM said assets such as vehicles were removed from the factory, causing irreversible damage to the company.
French voters are being deluged with false stories on social media ahead of the country's presidential election, though the onslaught of fake news is not as severe as that during last year's U.S. presidential campaign. There is evidence to back up complaints by officials in France, Germany, and the United States that Russia is trying to replicate its cyber-powered election meddling in American politics, this time in France. Just days before France votes in the first round of a presidential election, misinformation at times has accounted for 1/4 of the political links shared on Twitter in France. Funk news is defined as deliberately false stories and those expressing ideologically extreme, hyperpartisan, or conspiratorial views with logical flaws and opinions passed along as facts. To combat the problem, Facebook recently suspended 30,000 suspected automated accounts in France. Although it characterized the cleanup as an objective move against spamming, many of the profiles were disturbingly politically driven misinformation and propaganda. On Twitter, where automated accounts were allowed, many of the same accounts that promoted Republican Donald Trump in the U.S. campaign last year have turned their attention to pushing conspiracy theories and far-right viewpoints.
The Democratic National Committee and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders are under fire for supporting a mayoral candidate with a mixed record on abortion. This highlights divisions within the party even as the DNC seeks to mend fences with its high-profile Unity Tour. The tour, which kicked off Monday, seemed to get off to a rocky start. But the biggest bump came when progressives began withdrawing support for Omaha, Nebraska mayoral candidate Heath Mello after discovering that, as a Nebraska state senator 8 years ago, he supported legislation to require women to undergo an ultrasound before getting an abortion.
German engineers did a test flight with the latest flying car technology called the Lilium Jet. The Lilium Jet does have wings, but it looks more like a car than a plane. It has 36 propellers to help it fly. It can go 200 miles per hour. It can carry up to 5 people, and it is powered by an electric battery. According to the engineers behind the Lilium Jet, humans are nowhere near having flying cars that everyone can use, but the Lilium Jet puts us one step closer to making that a reality. On Thursday, the Russian Supreme Court decided the country's branch of Jehovah's Witnesses is extremist, likening it to the Islamic State. The group is to be disbanded and its assets seized by the government. Jehovah's Witnesses have about 170,000 followers in Russia. The group will appeal the decision. They have a month to do so. Under Russian law, the ban would not prohibit individual believers from following their faith. However, congregating and preaching would become offenses punishable with upwards of 5 years in prison.
According to a new study published in the Journal of Sex Research, there's not just a physical burden of not getting pregnant, but a mental and emotional burden that comes along with it. The study tracked 52 contraceptive counseling visits with women who said they didn't want children in the future, and for whom all available contraceptive methods were an option. It showed that clinicians articulated responsibilities associated with contraception that were integral to the physical work of using a method, but still skipped discussion of fundamentally mental and emotional tasks. The study also showed clinicians generally did not question that these responsibilities were assigned to women. The clinicians, most of whom were women, also showed reluctance in offering a permanent option like sterilization, thus legitimizing the assumption that women are responsible for fertility work. Assigning the work of fertility to women seems like common sense. After all, most contraceptive methods work in the female body, and the stakes of pregnancy seem higher for women. However, it's important to distinguish physical work from the mental and emotional labor that we tend to throw in with it.
On Wednesday, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said that the United States will conduct a comprehensive review of its policy towards Iran, including the 2016 nuclear deal. Tillerson said that the deal represents the same failed approach of the past that brought us to the current imminent threat we face in North Korea. Tillerson notified Congress on Tuesday that despite finding that Iran was meeting the terms of the deal, the Trump administration will continue to review on whether to break from the agreement. Tillerson said that Iran remains a leading state sponsor of terrorism. He said that the evidence is clear Iran's proactive actions threaten the U.S., the region, and the world.
President Donald Trump's lawyers argued in a court filing that protesters have no right to express dissenting views at his campaign rallies. Their reasoning stems from such protests supposedly infringing on his First Amendment rights. The filing comes in a case brought by 3 protesters who allege they were roughed up and ejected from a March 2016 Trump campaign rally in Louisville, Kentucky by Trump supporters. The Trump fans were supposedly incited by the then candidate's calls from the stage to get him out of here.
U.S. authorities have prepared charges to seek the arrest of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. The Justice Department's investigation of Assange and WikiLeaks dates to at least 2010, when the site first gained wide attention for posting thousands of files stolen by the former U.S. Army intelligence analyst now known as Chelsea Manning. Prosecutors have struggled with whether the First Amendment precluded the prosecution of Assange, but now believe they have found a way to move forward. During President Barack Obama's administration, officials at the Justice Department determined it would be difficult to bring charges against Assange because WikiLeaks wasn't alone in publishing documents stolen by Manning. The U.S. view of WikiLeaks and Assange began to change after investigators found what they believe was proof that WikiLeaks played an active role in helping Edward Snowden, a former NSA analyst, disclose a massive cache of classified documents. Assange remains holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, seeking to avoid an arrest warrant on rape charges in Sweden. According to Reuters, Venezuela's opposition called for renewed nationwide protests on Thursday to pressure the government of President Nicolas Maduro to hold elections and improve a collapsing economy. Hundreds of thousands of people flooded the streets of Caracas and provincial cities on Wednesday, the latest and largest in several weeks of protest against what Maduro's opponents condemn as a lurch towards dictatorship. Government officials dismissed the protest, characterized by street barricades and clashes with security forces, as violent and lawless efforts to overthrow Maduro's leftist government, with the backing of ideological adversaries in Washington.
The White House has denied allegations that it misled the public by announcing last week that a U.S. aircraft carrier was heading toward the Sea of Japan. On April 8th, the Navy announced that the USS Carl Vinson had been diverted to the Western Pacific. President Trump said at the time that he was sending, quote, an armada to Korean waters as a dramatic show of force against North Korea. However, a Navy photograph taken April 15th showed the strike group off the coast of Indonesia, thousands of miles from North Korea. South Korean media began decrying the discrepancy as, quote, Trump's Vinson lie. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer denied that there was any deception involved and said the Vinson's ultimate destination was the Korean Peninsula after taking part in, quote, scheduled exercises with Australian forces. U.S. officials insist it's now on its way to the Sea of Japan. For Newsbeat Social from Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
The World Wildlife Fund says nearly half of all World Heritage sites are affected by illegal poaching and trafficking, and it's causing a decline in wildlife populations. These sites are intended to protect threatened wildlife. The WWF's report found poaching of animals like tigers, elephants, and rhinos in at least 43 World Heritage sites. On average, many wildlife populations dropped by nearly 60% between 1970 and 2012. The report, which was released earlier this month, also reveals a threat against human lives. 595 park rangers, many of whom were protecting World Heritage sites, were killed between 2009 and 2016. Ashley Tumer, global campaign manager at WWF International, told Deutsche Welle many countries do not have consequences severe enough to deter illegal harvesting, fishing, and logging in these protected sites. The WWF says international teamwork is needed to change the current situation. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Gabrielle Caldwell.
For the second day in a row, Russia flew 2 long-range bombers off the coast of Alaska. 2 nuclear-capable Russian Tu-95 Bear bombers were spotted flying about 41 miles off the coast of Alaska on April 18th. A U.S. Air Force E-3 Sentry was dispatched to intercept and accompanied the 2 Russian bombers for several hours before they turned back 35 miles from the coast. The incident occurred just hours after 2 U.S. F-22 fighter jets intercepted the same type of Russian aircraft in the area. Although the bombers were flying in international airspace, they entered the U.S. military's Air Defense Identification Zone, which extends 200 nautical miles from shore. Unidentified military aircraft are asked to identify themselves while transiting that zone. These encounters mark the first time in over 2 years that Russian military aircraft have approached the U.S. mainland. For Newsbeat Social from Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
In the latest installment in North Korea's many threats, the official newspaper of the Workers' Party said a North Korean preemptive strike would destroy both South Korea and the United States. This is not a new threat, as that North Korea regularly threatens to destroy Japan, South Korea, and the US. The country has shown no slowdown in its hostility after a failed missile test Sunday. North Koreans are also angered by the current round of US-South Korean military exercises. North Korea always denounces such training exercises.
A new federal report has found that U.S. deportation officers are so overwhelmed with work that they cannot effectively fulfill their responsibilities, a problem that shows no sign of letting up as the Trump administration cracks down on illegal immigration. The report by the Office of the Inspector General on Thursday also found that U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement doesn't collect or analyze data on employee workloads and therefore can't allocate staff where they're needed.
It's about to get tougher to apply for citizenship in Australia. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull announced the overhaul April 20th. He says, quote, "There is no more important title in our democracy than Australian citizen, and that institution must reflect Australian values. Moving forward, applicants will have to pass an English test comprised of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Residency requirements will jump from 1 year to 4. The citizenship test itself will also get tougher, with new questions to assess an immigrant's commitment to shared Aussie values. Turnbull says citizenship should reflect fundamental values like respect, rule of law, freedom, and democracy, not just whether an applicant knows how many senators serve in Parliament. The Sydney Morning Herald reports there will be a 6-week consultation period to shape the new policies. Opposition leader Bill Shorten reportedly describes some of the changes as reasonable, but also suggests they pander to the right wing. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
NASA scientists have taken the first pictures of a massive crack in one of Greenland's largest glaciers. On April 14th, scientists with NASA's Operation Icebridge flew over the Petermann Glacier ice shelf to photograph the mysterious rift. The crack appears near the center of the ice shelf and is close to a larger split currently spreading toward the ice shelf center. Researchers said if the cracks meet, an enormous piece of the ice shelf could break away. In 2010, a chunk 4 times the size of Manhattan broke off the Petermann Glacier, and another about 1/4 that size split in 2012. But the NASA team noted some potentially good news. The main flow of the glacier's ice intersects with the new crack and may stop it from spreading. Scientists don't yet know why the crack formed, but warmer temperatures or warmer water underneath the shelf might be to blame. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Gary Brigoldlaw.
The Philippines announced it will hold annual military exercises with the United States in May, despite recent uncertainty over the two countries' future military cooperation. The decision comes after President Rodrigo Duterte called for the exercises to be canceled and for the U.S. to withdraw troops from the Philippines. Unlike in previous years, the 10-day drills won't include simulations of protecting disputed territory or be held on the island of Palawan. They also won't involve live fire. The changes reflect the warming of relations between the Philippines and China. Last month, Duterte invited China to send a Navy ship to visit. This year's drills will focus on humanitarian assistance and counterterrorism. The Philippine Army is battling terrorist group Abu Sayyaf, which is responsible for kidnappings, beheadings, and bombings in the country. The Philippine military green-lighted the drills on April 16th. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Neela Uni.
A new study finds that each year, about 51,000 people in the United States visit the emergency room after being injured by law enforcement. Researchers analyzed existing emergency room data spanning 2006 to 2012. They say most of the 355,000 visits involved minor injuries. About 1,200, or 0.3%, resulted in death. Findings appear in the journal JAMA Surgery. While public attention has, quote, surged in recent years, authorities say the annual figure, 51,000 ER visits, was stable over the 7-year period. Over 80% of patients injured by law enforcement were men. The average age was 32. Substance abuse and mental illness were common. The study's lead author, Dr. Eleanor Kaufman, says that while it's impossible to determine how many of these injuries were avoidable, the numbers provide a baseline that may help to mitigate law enforcement-related injuries in the future. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.